We have come a very long way in our journey through time with the people of Israel. In earlier episodes, we saw that the journey began with the calling of one man named Abram 3,800 years ago. God chose this man and asked him to leave where he was, his family and friends, and to move to a land that God said he would show him. And Abraham launched out in faith. And God made covenants with this man that involved land, descendants, nationhood. Now in this final episode, let's ask again, how and when were these promises fulfilled? God gave Abraham and his descendants what we know today as the Promised Land. The name is Israel. But this Promised Land has also been a burden because there has been a never-ending struggle to keep the land and to defend it against all manner of enemies. You know, we are a charity, and much of our charitable work occurs in the border areas that have been subject to incessant rocket attacks. You know, I knew the former security leader in that area, responsible for the security of the region, and he explained to me that either he or his wife had to stand by the bathroom door when their teenage daughter was taking a shower. Can you imagine this? And they had to leave the door open, and of course with discretion, but in case of a rocket attack from Gaza, because it took only 15 seconds from launch to landing. And they would have to be there to say to their daughter, the alarm has sounded, we need to get to the safe room as soon as possible. Our charity is active in that area. We have been for years, helping the less fortunate, helping special children, a variety of things that we do to make a difference, to encourage the people to stay where they are in their rightful inheritance in these communities along the border. And of course, the whole world had a wake-up call on October 7, 2023, when Hamas terrorists stormed across the border and killed some 1,200 innocent people. This too is Israel's struggle. Yes, God gave her the land by covenant promises, but what a terrible price she has had to pay in blood shed to remain in the land and to claim her rightful inheritance.
Sderot is just one of many Israeli communities that have endured endless rocket attacks from enemies whose purpose is to kill or maim indiscriminately. What can be said, however, is that this town of 24,000, which sits less than 1 kilometer from the Gaza fence, has taken the brunt of these attacks in recent years. Today, Sderot is made up predominantly of Jewish inhabitants, with a smaller contingent of Arab residents. For the last 8 years, all of them have lived with the constant fear of hearing the sounds of red color alarms that signal incoming rockets. Sderot is at the forefront of the battle lines that separate Israel from her enemies. Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in August 2005 was an attempt to bring peace to this area. However, Israel's enemies within Gaza quickly interpreted the withdrawal as a sign of weakness. Increased rocket barrages soon followed until in late December 2008, Israeli military forces entered Gaza in an attempt to stop or at the very least reduce the number of attacks.
our life is holy. You know, we want that our children will live and will success and will achieve the goods that we have in our life. The fundamental people wish that them children will die as a shaheed. No, you cannot imagine, you cannot understand something like this. Nobody can understand something like this. How you can deal with mother that you see her in the TV, and she said, I wish that I will have a luck and my children will die as a shaheed. It's something that we cannot understand because we have different culture. We think that we have to pray that our children will live and will success.
Living as they do in close proximity to Gaza, the citizens of Sderot have chosen to stand firm in the face of an evil onslaught, whose source is the culture of death that currently holds the citizens of Gaza in its grip. Under such circumstances, one might expect Israeli parents, not only in Sderot but throughout the land, to project onto their children feelings of resentment and bitterness. Surprisingly, the opposite is true.
There's an Israeli school book for, I think it's 3rd or 4th graders, and it's a reader, and one of the stories in the school book is called The Greatest Seaman in Jaffa. Now, it turns out the greatest seaman in Jaffa is an Arab named Abu Chomus, and a boy in the story goes out in a rowboat with a girl, an Israeli boy, and a storm comes and they're drowning. And Abu Chomus comes and he saves them. And then the boy says, I knew he wouldn't let us down. I knew he would save us. And then you see an illustration with an Arab with a kafiyah throwing a rope to save these two Jewish Israeli children. What's the message in the Israeli school book? 1, Jaffa, which is a Jewish city. The most famous seaman of Jaffa can be an Arab. First important message. And the second message is not only aren't Arabs your enemies, but if you're in trouble, an Arab is going to save your life.
What Israelis are teaching their children stands in stark contrast to what Palestinian parents are teaching theirs. The Bible is the source of this value which emphasizes respect for human life. According to the Torah, all men have been created in the image of God. It follows logically, therefore, that all men have intrinsic value. It is for this reason that God commands all of Israel to treat strangers in their midst with love and respect. If a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
They say, we love death more than these Jews love life. And, you know, it's very possible they love death a lot. They don't love death more than we love life. We love life. And for us, you know, we will go as far as is necessary to protect human life, Jewish life, non-Jewish life. Life is paramount. Life is sacred, is sacred. Okay, this is the greatest gift that God can give, and it's our job to make life, you know, as beautiful and as positive and as fulfilling as possible.
When these rocket barrages increased instead of decreasing following Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, it became clear that stronger action was necessary. But even then, Israel forces showed incredible restraint and respect for life in the face of unusual provocation by terrorist enemies, such as Hamas in Gaza.
Israel fought a war in Gaza against the Hamas that has never been fought before. When in history did a country drop leaflets down on houses warning not just the civilians who were there, but the terrorists that Israel was about to attack that house? When did this happen before? Never. Israel would call. Israel got the telephone numbers. They called the civilians. They said, we know there are terrorists in your house. Get out because we're coming in an hour or two.
We're talking about using modern technology developed in Israel to send cellular phone messages by SMS. to people living in those buildings saying, leave, we're about to attack.
And of course, the terrorists had the same warning, and many of them escaped because of that. No one has ever fought a war as clean as Israel did. The fact that there are casualties in a war is hell, war is terrible, you should never have war. But if someone's killing your people, you have an obligation to eliminate that source of the evil.
Time and again, Israel has demonstrated an unusual determination to avoid civilian casualties, even when this meant placing her own troops at greater risk. She has used infantry for door-to-door advances, when it would have been easier to bomb whole neighborhoods from the air. But she has done so when to do otherwise would have resulted in civilian deaths, and she has paid a heavy price.
Sacrificing our own soldiers' lives, putting those lives at risk and sacrificing those lives, not to achieve a military objective where, of course, we all know that we must, unfortunately, sacrifice the lives of our boys and girls in military operations to achieve a military objective, but sacrificing the lives of our soldiers in order to protect the innocent civilians, men, women, and children on the other side in a conflict that we're operating under rules of engagement that are inconceivable for America, Canada, Britain, or other Western nations.
Of course, Israel's moral stance in war means nothing to terrorists who are only too glad to take up firing positions among their own civilian populations. They know that dead or injured civilians provide fodder for their propaganda initiatives in a world where anti-Semitism is all too prevalent, and where there are always those who are quick to point accusing fingers at Israel, regardless of her morality, also often forgotten or overlooked in this long history of conflict is the fact that Israel had jurisdictional authority over Gaza and the West Bank for many years. In fact, in 1996, after nearly 27 years of Israeli oversight, a poll was taken throughout the Palestinian territories. Palestinians were asked to express who they considered to be the greatest advocates in the world for democracy and human rights. When faced with this question, a majority of Palestinians placed Israel at the top of the list.
78% of Palestinians gave Israel a positive rating in democracy and human rights. The United States only got 65% positive rating, and France only 55% positive, and the Palestinians themselves only 50%. In other words, Palestinians, after 27 years of Israeli administration, realized that Israel was the best country in the world in democracy and rights. And what's so interesting and important, the next year, Shkaki did the same poll, and Israel had shifted from 78% positive to 77% positive, which meant that it was really being proven. The next year it was 76% positive. So that here we see that the contact that Israel had with the Palestinian population, they just appreciated and they respected Israel.
Israeli concern for the well-being of others is also reflected in Palestinian society. Indeed, most items of infrastructure in the Palestinian areas that can be considered good, whether universities, hospitals, clinics, or economic institutions, were inevitably built under Israeli jurisdiction.
When the Palestinians were under Jordan and Egypt, their life expectancy was 47. Under Israel, it went up to almost 70. Under the Jordanians and Egyptians, they had no university. Israel opened 11 universities for them. Israel started an economic infrastructure. The West Bank was the fourth fastest growing economy in the world in the 1970s. In other words, everything good the Palestinians had came from Israel, and the polls show that the Palestinians appreciated it.
The problem all Palestinians face is that they have become the victims of extremist elements and terrorist militias who have indoctrinated the population by demonizing Israel as the primary hindrance to Palestinian political aspirations. Under this scenario, Palestinians are forced to see Israel as an enemy, one that has no right to live among the Arab Muslim peoples of the Middle East.
If the other side will stand up and declare, not to us, not to Washington, not to Europe, but to their own people in Arabic, and say, we recognize the legitimacy of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. That we are not here as conquerors and as colonialists and as usurpers and as strangers. But our history has roots so deep in this land that without it we do not have a Jewish identity as a people anymore. When that happens, within a week, we shall have peace, not only for our benefit, but for theirs. We shall have peace when our enemies will grieve for every loss of their soldier child as we grieve for ours.
Today, more than ever before, it seems as though our world is at a tipping point as generation after generation slips further into chaos and darkness. Not since the days of Noah has the earth seen such decadence, immorality, and violence. But what does this mean for those who believe, and what consequences await for those who do not? As it was in the days of Noah, the DVD series of Dr. John Tweedie's 21st season of The Prophetic Connection explores the scriptures to uncover the meaning behind the signs of these troubled times. Call the number on your screen now, 1-888-206-1986, or visit C4IAmerica.com to become a new monthly partner with your gift of just $25 a month or more, and you will receive this DVD set, ideal for individuals or small group studies, along with the bi-monthly newspaper Israel the Prophetic Connection. We're waiting to hear from you. And so the Jews continued to pray, watch, and patiently wait for that day the prophet said would surely come, when Messiah would reign from Jerusalem and when Israel's light would radiate to the ends of the earth. The prophet Isaiah expressed that hope this way. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. The prophet was declaring that light and peace would come at the end of the journey with Messiah's advent. In that day, the dark night of Israel's suffering would end, and the darkness of her circumstance would give way to the brightness of a new dawn. Only then would Israel's light be at its brightest, and only then would the nations of the earth know the abiding peace that had eluded them for so long.
We invented the notion of international disarmament through our prophets, who envisioned a future, indeed, where the lion shall lie down with the lamb, where swords shall be beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. These are the words of our prophets.
All these beautiful expressions of the prophets, all the prophets are, all of their prophecy is it's tochacha, it's criticism of the Jewish people, but it all ends positively. It's all about what will be in the end. Don't despair. Many of them are writing at very difficult times, like Jeremiah, or Isaiah, who didn't witness the destruction of the temple, but he witnessed the spiritual decline of Jerusalem, the Assyrian siege of the city. They all appreciated the end game. They understood very clearly what the Jewish people were about, what history is about. that we have to get back to the garden, that it will end up there. And their final vision was always, even the prophets who witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem like Jeremiah, was that ultimately God doesn't change his mind, he doesn't forget his people, that the Jewish people will be back into the land of Israel, Jerusalem will be rebuilt physically and spiritually, and this idea of the ultimate state that Jerusalem is in is, again, not a beautiful city physically, although it is a beautiful city physically, but it's the spiritual power that radiates out of Jerusalem.
The clarion cry for the Hebrew prophets was that at the end of days, the promised Messiah would come and rule and reign from Jerusalem. When he did, Jerusalem's light would be greater than it was at any point in her long and turbulent history. Until then, this holy city, and all of Israel for that matter, would struggle to be light amid the surrounding darkness. This was the nation's calling. This had always been her calling, whether in the land or in exile among the nations.
Israel is told to be a light. What's a light? When there's darkness and you just do what's right. You behave according to values, everyone will benefit from that light. Everyone will see it on their own. And that, I think, is Israel's goal, to create the best society that we possibly can on all levels. And I mean morally, socially, culturally, and technologically. And then it will be a light that everybody benefits just by looking and say, I want to be like that.
4 millennia have come and gone since God first called Abraham. Much has happened to the people of Israel during this time, but one thing has never changed: their calling to be a reflection of God's light in a world that knew not God.
The position of the Jewish people in the world was never a supremacist position. Israel was chosen to be a part of the world, not to be above the world. Israel is, I like to use the image of holding a map, and the goal is to get everybody to cross and to reach the end. Judaism wasn't given for the Jewish people. The values were human values of decency, of goodness, of everything that the prophets talk about. That was given for the world. And God chose one person to hold the map. That was Abraham and his descendants. But it wasn't for Abraham. It was for the whole world. And the chosenness was not to be chosen separate. It was to be chosen with more responsibility, bigger headache. You have to make sure that the whole world understands these values. That's what Judaism is. That's the message of Judaism.
The prophet Isaiah foresaw a time when Israel would radiate her light to the ends of the earth, and when Jerusalem would become a praise in all the world. Jews throughout history were well aware of Isaiah's words, even as they dreamed of that day when his prophecy would come to pass. For many, it was the hope they held on to in the darkest of circumstances. For Zion's sake, I will not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness, and her salvation as a lamp that burns. I have set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. They shall never hold their peace day or night. You who make mention of the Lord, do not keep silent, and give him no rest till he establishes, until he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. This then is Israel's hope and Jerusalem's destiny, from the moment God promised Abraham that he and his descendants would bless the world until now. It is the words of the prophets that have kept Israel going in her journey through time, prophetic promises which have sustained her as she struggled to reflect God's light beneath the long shadows of the obstacles that stood in her path. Nor have these challenges diminished with the dawn of a new millennium. There are still those whose stated goal is to wipe Israel off the map. Will they succeed? Can they succeed where others before them have tried and failed?
The Bible describes us as an eternal nation. And the fact is we have lived for an eternity. We are one of the oldest civilizations in the world. One speaks of 3 ancient great civilizations: the Chinese, the Indian, and the Jewish. The Chinese are well over 1 billion. The Indians are 1 billion. And we are maybe 12 million. Hounded, pushed from pillar to post, from century after century. And yet, every single one of our detractors, every single one of those who sought to destroy us, have themselves been obliterated, and the people of Israel lives on. I think it's one of the great mysteries of history itself.
As I wrap up this final episode in this new series, there's a lingering question. After all the hardship, the struggle, the never-ending attacks against this Jewish nation, will Israel survive? Can we be sure that Israel will survive? Well, I could go to Jeremiah chapter 31 and read the scripture, but let me just summarize it for you in this way. Within the covenant promises God has made to Israel, there is also this promise, where God says through the prophet Jeremiah, as long as the sun shines by day and the moon and the stars by night, Israel shall remain. There can be no greater guarantee of Israel's survival than that. The words of Almighty God, who has promises to keep, but has already kept so many promises to this chosen nation. God says, I have plans and purposes for Israel, and they will be fulfilled. This is his promise. So we know from the Bible, these holy, sacred scriptures, that everything that God has promised this nation, in spite of all of the struggles and all of the blood shed, God says this nation will survive. Thank you for coming on this journey with us, where we have examined Israel, a blessing to all nations.
This past year has been incredibly challenging, from the attacks on Israel to the ongoing struggles faced by the Jewish people worldwide. We've seen heartache, loss, and resilience like never before. Yet in the midst of these trials, C4I has been a source of hope and support in the Holy Land, providing aid, comfort, and a tangible reminder that they are not alone. Your generosity makes this life-changing work possible. Your one-time gift of just $25 or more helps us continue this vital mission. And as a thank you for your support, you will receive the bi-monthly newspaper Israel the Prophetic Connection, filled with stories and articles keeping you informed and up to date on all that is happening in Israel. Call now, 1-888-206-1986, or visit c4iamerica.com to make your one-time donation. Together, we can make a difference for the people of Israel.